This is Fam Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air for the first time. And this is with Valena Beety, and you are a queer litigator fighting for wrongful convictions of women and LGBTQ folk. And we want to welcome you to the Fam Electric Ghost podcast. This is actually going to be we're actually at episode, I believe, 933. Been on the air since 2016. That's tracking on Apple Podcast, that number. And we're glad to have you on the program tonight. And yeah, it's going to be cool. So we've got your link to Kensington Books. That will be clickable. It's kind of a long link. I probably won't repeat it. But yeah, we could probably talk about that main topic, which I'm going to bring up again, the wrongful convictions of queer people. How did they happen? And however you want to start that, let me know.
Yeah, thanks for having me on today. And that long link, if folks just want to remember, there's a book that I wrote called Manifesting Justice. So if you have my name, Valena Beety, and you have Manifesting Justice, you'll find it. And it's about how women and queer people are, in particular, wrongfully convicted. So how do they happen? Basically, at least in the United States, if you want to have your conviction reversed, you often have to prove that you were innocent of the crime, that you didn't commit it. So how do people prove it wasn't Valena who did it? It was Todd. The best way, the 100% proof way to do that is through DNA evidence. So DNA, you can 100% say it's not Valena, it's Todd. Well, most queer people are wrongly convicted in cases where there is no DNA evidence. So this could be a child death case. A lot of women are wrongly convicted in child death cases where it's caretakers, where there's a natural cause of death. This could be sexual abuse cases where there's an allegation of sexual abuse and there's no evidence of it, but the evidence ends up being that the person is LGBTQ. So in those types of cases, where is your 100% proof that the crime didn't occur, that it's a no crime wrongful conviction, and thus that you didn't commit it? So I don't think we've talked enough about how queer people are wrongly convicted where no crime occurred. And I know that may sound crazy to people. How can you be convicted where no crime occurred? Well, think about a house fire where someone dies. Well, it could be that there was a space heater that caught on fire and started this fire, and the person inside tragically died. Or it could be that someone else set the fire intentionally. Well, police are not great at being able to distinguish between whether someone set a fire or whether it was accidentally set or accidentally happened. So if the space heater started the fire and yet they say this is arson, how can you prove, no, it wasn't arson, no, I didn't do this? And that's a no crime.
Yeah, I think a lot of African Americans we can totally identify, because like there's a whole history where like after slavery, in the South, just walking down the street, you would get convicted for walking down the street with no money, and they put you back into an actual back onto the cotton field, and you're basically like an indentured servant. And they found all these ways to criminalize black people. So I think it's the same kind of playbook that they're using for your queer people that they've always kind of used in America for the other.
Yeah, it's a similar playbook, except for the amount of profit that prisons and governments made and actually continue to make, but definitely made after the Civil War on locking up and incarcerating Black people, particularly in the South, because then they made them work and made them work on the railways, made them work in really dangerous situations, right? And so they made so much money off of it. So you're absolutely right that they made up these Black codes that would only apply to Black people that said you have to be carrying ID at all time. If you're not carrying the ID you're supposed to, then you'll get a 10-year sentence. Here's an allegation that you stole a
Yeah.
chicken.
Or
You're
like
going to
the
get 5
Tulsa
years for
riot
that.
situation.
And you
Somebody,
there's
somebody looked,
documented
yeah, I mean,
information.
like in Tulsa, that whole Tulsa riot,
Yeah,
somebody allegedly looked at somebody or maybe did something and it wasn't even proven. Then they burned all the Black businesses out. And I was like, okay. So yeah, there's a lot of history, but so I think you have allies, where
yeah,
people like I think that from my neck of the woods, people who have the same kind of experience in America and continue to have it. We're like, yeah, I can identify with that, and I just don't like the direction that we've seen from this like Supreme Court. It's very hypocritical. You see women's rights taken away, you see, Black rights taken away. You see all kinds of rights being taken away, and then you see there's no accountability for their ethics, where they're hanging out with billionaires and making choices that
you're
happen to
right.
be what the billionaires
Right.
want. So you're like, okay, well, how do we stand up? How do we all stand up when
Right.
we see all
Right.
this, like, obvious wrongdoing and wrong-headed decisions? It seems like gerrymandered court decisions. Like we see people having to really, like, if you were taking
Yeah.
a law school class and some of the reasons that you would say to overturn Roe or overturn a lot of these cases, and you gave them to your law professors, I don't know if your professor would agree with your rationale. They seem to have kind of gerrymandered the law and done something that doesn't seem to be started, to have that kind of, history. It seems to be out of left field or right field.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. They're doing exactly what they want to. And the Supreme Court actually just came down with a decision a couple weeks ago, yet again. So I do post conviction litigation. So after someone's been, or post conviction litigation, where someone's already been convicted. So you're trying to get back into court. And the Supreme Court just said yet again, it doesn't matter if you're innocent. You have to follow these special procedures for a court to even listen to your evidence of innocence. And I find that so ironic that someone who's incarcerated, who has no lawyer, is somehow supposed to know all of these procedures and timelines when we have, as you said, people on the Supreme Court who can't seem to figure out, oh, I should be disclosing these gifts that I get. Oh, I should be following some sort of ethics rules. Like they can't even figure those things out, but they're expecting incarcerated people
Yeah, I
to
mean,
follow
they're
these
doing very
specific
offensive things. I think to
protocols.
women, like women have medical situations where they might die, and they're saying forcing you to have the baby, and saying it's a crime if you try to leave, and they're going to put you in jail, or they might put you to death
Yeah,
if you try to do something. I'm like, really? They seem very draconian. It seems like they're going back to like the 1700s to like justify what they're doing, and it doesn't seem like the 21st century.
they are.
Even if you look at like their affirmative
Yeah,
action case, they say, "Oh, military academies, it doesn't apply." So he's saying I can go into the Air Force Academy and I can still have affirmative action, but if I want to go to Harvard, I can't do that. So Harvard Business School, but if I want to be a soldier, I want to get an F-16 and bomb people, I can do that. I can still have that protection, but I don't have the protection at Harvard Business School. And that's a really kind of interesting to me. It's like if it's the rule, how come it doesn't apply across the board?
yeah, and also, I mean, they're so concerned about affirmative action. And then, what is it? So 5% of people who apply to Harvard have
Yeah,
they're a
you get in no
legacy,
matter what.
right?
Yeah,
Their
money.
parent, some family member went to Harvard, and 30% of them are they make up 30% of the class. So overwhelmingly, if your parent went to Harvard, then you get to go to Harvard. But that doesn't seem to matter to this court. Like that type
No,
of,
because it's about the
affirmative
money, and
action
they're
doesn't
hanging
seem to
out with the
matter to the
billionaires
court.
on the yacht. So I guess that's fine. And I went to Bowdoin, and I ran into rich kids like that were legacy. Their name was on the building, and and I was outperforming them academically. And I'm like, okay,
Wow.
these guys are questioning me. I'm questioning you. It's like, because you weren't really, and
Mhm.
then you get the job on
Mhm.
Wall Street or you get the job in the boardroom right off the bat, and it seems like nobody questions that, and that's all
Mhm.
natural, whatever. That's natural progression for you, but yeah, they don't seem. Yeah, it just doesn't. It
Right,
seems
you
the
deserved it.
stratification that they want to create is very top down. It's very
Mhm.
aristocratic, very oligarch, type of behavior. Just so you get in these oligarchs, and then you start wondering, it's like,
Yeah.
how come they identify with Russian oligarchs over what they said they believed in? They said they read Menace, but now they don't seem to see a red menace. It's like, it's okay. You're flipping the switch, because I remember going to school during the Reagan time, and it was all about that. Now they don't seem to care about that.
Yeah, I mean it's so many things. And going back to the repro rights, so in Manifesting Justice, I also talk about women being
Yeah.
criminalized for bodily autonomy, right? For both for abortion, but also for having a miscarriage, so or a stillbirth, and the state with bogus, faulty scientific evidence saying, "Oh no, no, you intentionally caused this," or there's something from going back to you said the Middle Ages. There's something from the
Oh
Middle
wow.
Ages called the floating lung test, which is supposed to determine whether a child was born alive or not. And you take a piece of the lung and put it in water and see if it floats. Well, if it floats, then ostensibly the child took its first breath and was born alive. Well, guess what? Most of the time it floats.
That's not very
Like it's
scientific to me.
completely unreliable. But that's going to be your evidence to say, hey, guess what? No, it's not. But you're going to say that this parent killed the child. You're going to base a murder charge on
It
that
seems
floating lung
very.
test. Yeah,
It
instead
seems
of
like
it
where
being a
where
stillbirth.
did these people start becoming scientists? They're making scientific decisions based on bad information. And the thing is, like, then they're taking groups and subjugating groups that have always historically had issues. Like, the queer people had a lot of issues, all the time, until they felt the freedom to kind of stonewall riots. They could get out and really express themselves and start to demand equal treatment. Equal treatment for people was, well, like 1954, 1966, 1965. It's not that, it hasn't been around that long. The Stonewall riots, that didn't happen that long ago. But they're like, oh, we got to
Mm-mm.
put the kibosh on that. We got to stop it. So it's like, we didn't really have a very long run. If you look at it, it's a very short amount of time.
No. Yeah. And actually, the 1960s and 1970s Black Power movement and queer liberation movement often worked together to challenge the police because they were both being criminalized for their
Yeah.
identities. You until 2000, you couldn't be openly gay. You couldn't have some sort of sex with someone of the same gender without it being illegal and potentially going to prison for it. So there
There's a lot
has
of
been a lot of
laws in a
alignment on
lot of
that.
states, especially in the South and maybe even the Midwest, that I've been aware of, that actually criminalize sex. And actually, if they're still on the books, and people,
Oh
if you
yeah,
get some sheriff that decides to do it,
they're
it's
still
like
on the
they
books.
could do it. They could go after you. And it was like, that doesn't seem right at all. Do you run into
You are
things like that
absolutely right.
where people are actually pulling all those old laws and
Yeah,
using it?
there was a Louisiana sheriff who got into the news a couple of years ago because he so regularly did it that he would arrest queer people, LGBTQ people, throw them in jail. And it was so bad that the local prosecutor came out and said, we're not going to be bringing charges on this. This is no longer a crime.
I think you're right, Manel.
And
Yeah.
even though it's on the books, um, it's no longer a crime. And yet the sheriff was like, it's on the books. I'm going to keep arresting people, and again and again and again. So yeah, it absolutely, police have the discretion to do that. And it may not sound as bad if you're like, oh, you're not going to get
You're
conviction,
being
but you're still
harassed.
being
It's
thrown in
harassment. Yeah,
jail,
I mean, it seems
which
like
could be for
it's
days.
it's like it's basically
Oh
you're taking
yeah,
certain groups
oh
of
yeah.
people. It's like when I get pulled over, somebody asks me if I own the car, right? And that's like the classic thing that happens to a lot of middle class blacks is like they want to come after us and they do something like they'll stop you. It's like, oh, do you really own this BMW? Do you really own this Lexus? And my father and my grandfather, my uncles, we're all like, middle class blacks, but we would get hit with this thing driving while black. They're just going to come up and the first thing they ask you, you're not even doing over the
Mm-hmm,
speed limit.
mm-hmm.
Oh, and I actually fought it. And then the guy didn't show up. I actually fought the ticket because I went to the judge and say, hey, this guy just asked me if I owned a car and I wasn't even going over. And the state trooper failed to show up. So I said, I tell
Yep.
all my friends, like, challenge it. Because, like, why are you going to have to deal with that? I don't want to deal with that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, the police power to pull people over is extraordinarily broad. I mean, they can pull you over for, oh, it looked like you swerved out of your lane. You went over the dividing line.
Yeah, I
You
got
did
a
a
lot of
rolling
legs.
stop. I mean, they can just, we have so many car laws that if you're in your car, like the police, so that leads to a lot of racial
Yeah,
profiling,
then it must
just pulling
end up
people
being
over
work if they're
because of that.
tracking somebody from a nightclub and they've got this kind of sheriff mentality and they've been observing. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I found some queer people. I don't like them because my own kind of spiritual
Mm-hmm.
beliefs or whatever. And then they
Mm-hmm.
suddenly just, you know, bother them all the time. It's like, so yeah, it just becomes, you know, I think it just makes life harder when you already have things you have to deal with, and they're going to go and do these wrongful, you know, stops. And now you're talking about convictions of people just getting blamed because of their existence. Something happens, and they say, "Well, you must have been, you know, because the person's queer, or because they're black, or because they're a woman, or they must have done it because they got this belief
Mm-hmm.
that we're the child,
Yep.
you're like
Yep.
Garden of Eden, Eve's to blame, black people is like, oh, you're the sons of Cain. So they got all these kind of, Sodom and Gomorrah. They come up with all these reasons why they suddenly say, well, you must be the most likely suspect.
Yeah. Well, and to go back to what you were first saying, a good friend of mine um, was living in a small town and there was a lesbian bar and she would leave. And every time she would leave, the police would tail her and would pull her over for something. And it was specifically because she had been at this lesbian bar and she herself was queer. So absolutely, that happens. And in terms of wrongful conviction, so the main story of my book, Manifesting Justice, is about these three women who meet at a drug rehab facility in rural Mississippi. And two of these women, Tammy and Lee, they meet and they fall in love. And they finish the program and they graduate and they're leaving. And this third woman, Kim, asks if she can come with them, and she hasn't been doing as well. And they say yes, as kind people. Well, within 24 hours, Kim has overdosed. So they're in just rural Mississippi, and Lee and Tammy take her to the hospital. She's in a drug-induced coma, and there's a country doctor who thinks that Kim has been sexually assaulted. Uh, and so I know, so he brings in, he tells the police, but he also tells, this is the crazy, crazy part. He tells a local dentist and has a dentist come in and examine this woman, Kim, examine her body while she's naked and in a coma, examine her body And the dentist says that he finds bite marks. And in fact, he says that half of Kim's labia, her vagina, is bitten off. And there's no other evidence of this. There's no blood, there's no visuals, like there's no other evidence of this except for this dentist. But who could have done this? To your point, they're like, oh, well, who could have assaulted her and bitten her? Well, obviously, it's the two lesbians who she's been with. And that's what started their wrongful conviction. But it's these, sadly, imaginary crimes, these no crime wrongful convictions where prosecutors and police can just run with stereotypes about queer people, that queer people are
Mhm.
dangerous, that they're deviant, that they're deceptive, and run with that. And, a jury says, okay, this person, I don't know anyone who would do a crime like this. So it makes sense that a queer
They're
person
just trying
would
to build
convict
up this
them.
fear. It's like fear of the other. If somebody's not like
Mm-hmm.
you, they're most. And it was,
Absolutely.
the history in America is
Yep.
like if you're the
Yep.
next immigrant coming in, you're the Portuguese, you're the Irish, different groups come in, Haitians come in, Jamaicans. Anybody comes in, they get blamed for all the crime. They get blamed because they're the new kid on the block. And then if you're somebody that doesn't
Yeah.
look like everybody else, or doesn't behave like everybody, doesn't believe like everybody else, it's like, oh, it's the atheist that did it. Well, it's the Protestant that did it. It's the Catholic that did it. It's the Jewish person that did it. It's the Muslim that did it.
Mm,
It's like it's always find something to justify your argument because it's like you can't. It's kind of bullying. This bullying and the whole thing about America supposedly is supposed to be separation of church and state. You shouldn't have these overall ideas that seem to be coming from one
mm.
side that are not based in fact. Like you said, people are just making things up and pushing their own agenda, and then people not having the strength to actually say, like, is that actually valid? They're just letting kind of the bully run the show like it's high school.
Yeah. Well, in the 1980s and 1990s, there was something called in the United States the Satanic Panic, where there were all these criminal allegations that caretakers had been abusing children for satanic ritual purposes. And those were, again, frequently brought against gay men and queer people in general. So there's some also the San Antonio Four are some well-known lesbians in San Antonio who were wrongly convicted of sexual abuse of two children based on this satanic panic. Someone gets up there and says, "Oh, they're
Yeah,
performing these satanic rituals. They sacrifice these children
yeah.
on
We
the
hear that
altar
that
of
kind of
lust,"
idea that was
like,
even
which is
thrown out.
just completely made
Yeah,
up. Completely
Hillary
made up.
Clinton. There's a whole like conspiracy about something like that with Hillary, like Pizzagate or something. They made something up that something was that somebody was.
Oh yeah, that's
Yeah,
right.
it
I
seems to be a
forgot about
common
that.
thread.
Yeah. When it's like, who are the real
Yeah,
child
they make
abusers?
these
Oh,
common
it's the Catholic
threads
priests,
of this
right?
thing that they want to say, well, the Democrats and the Dems and the liberals and all these people on the left, they're into this, and it was okay, and then they just put it out there on in the media, on their right wing media, and they put it out there with these like shock jocks that just say all this stuff, and then people believe whatever they hear from kind of a bullying top down approach, and it gets really concerning when the law doesn't seem to actually stand up. You said, well, the law should take care of that. And this is where we can talk to your perspective. Is like you would think that the law is supposed to stop that, but then you see people still, playing games.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's how much power prosecutors have, that they can bring charges or not bring charges. I mean, again, like, where have we actually seen sexual abuse documented? It's been among religious leaders, particularly within the Catholic Church, right?
Yeah,
Like, that's where we actually see it documented, is among religious leaders. It's true. But instead, it's queer people It's LGBTQ
There's a lot of
people.
high power.
It's queer
There's a
people
lot
through
of high
satanic
powered.
rituals, and
There's a lot
there's
of high
no
powered
justification.
CEOs, CIOs. The people in the upper echelons that you find out they were doing something. If you go check, the whole thing with Epstein, the Epstein situation, he's like, oh, there's like royalty involved, CEOs involved, really high end people. It's not, and it's across the board. It's like these people are like, whether they're just kind of in this class, and then they're putting on these other classes that are like subjugated classes that are like they don't deserve that because they're not doing anything. And it's kind of like, okay, like the father said, don't do as I say, as I do. You do what I say. If they're telling you what to do, and then they find out they're doing it. They're the ones actually doing something. But
Yeah, I mean, there's a saying in criminal justice work: better to be rich and
yeah,
guilty than poor and innocent. That I mean, if you are wealthy, you can hire the best attorneys, you can have political influence on the prosecutors to drop the charges. But if you're poor, which most people who end up with charges against them are, which question that right there, then it's
it
just a
seems like a lot
treadmill
of
to
energy
convict
spent on
people.
people who are, the most vulnerable members of society getting hit because they are vulnerable, because they're like an easy target to actually fit somebody's agenda. So you have potentially people in political positions like district attorneys trying to create a record to show that they're tough on this and they want to have an agenda, and they kind of create a fake,
Hmm.
enemy. You make the fake. You, yeah, it seems like, is that what you see is
Yeah.
going on? Is it like at a level where it seems like they're just trying to create this menace, this fake menace?
Well, I think there's two things. One is that as much proof as we have that prisons don't actually stop criminal behavior, that they don't actually change people's behavior, we continue to see that as the only solution for everyone. So it's like just send everyone to prison. So we don't look at whether what we're
Hmm.
doing actually makes our community safer. We don't actually look at, and that's supposed to be the point of prosecutions, is to create safety. Well, we're not looking at whether we're creating safety. And then the second thing is there's a theory that our courts and the whole system isn't actually even about guilt or innocence, that it's about tracking people, and it's about tracking particular people. And as you said, vulnerable people. So tracking communities of color, tracking impoverished communities. Because once you charge and then ultimately convict someone, you have this whole system in place to track where they're working, what they're doing. They have to show up to a parole officer. So it's actually about just controlling
Yeah, that seems what's going
populations
on
and
with, like,
tracking them.
once Roe v. Wade was overturned, then you're telling people that women, they're tracking their periods, they're tracking their movement from state to state, and this is coming from people who
Mm-hmm.
say that you should have freedom, but then they're
Mm-hmm.
tracking your personal sexual behavior.
Right.
They're tracking your personal, like, to me,
Mm-hmm.
protected health information. You're tracking, yeah, period. Like, what right do you as the government
Oh,
have to
yeah.
track my daughter's period or any woman's period? What right do you have to do that? And what right do you have to track my deciding if I want to go to Boston to do whatever I want to do? I'm in Mississippi. I decided to go to Boston. You're going to tell me I can't go to Boston and I can't do something?
Mm-hmm.
Well, why? That doesn't. Yeah,
Particularly to do something that's
yeah.
legal in Boston, right? So, I mean, so we have these states trying to say, okay, you're in Texas, you can't get an abortion in Texas, but you're trying to go to Boston. Well, we're going to stop you.
And
We're
that's
going to
supposed to be
still
a
criminally
party
prosecute
that's
you.
about individual freedom. But then I guess that's only for certain, like if you're a guy. He's like you seem to, do you want to control women
Yeah.
to force them to have babies that you don't even want to take care of? You don't want to give people food stamps. You don't want to give them health care. So what is the point in bringing children in the
Right.
world and you don't actually even give them the right medical care? right? Or don't even give them food because you think you should they're lazy, so you shouldn't have to give them food. So
Mhm.
like, okay, you're gonna create all these more people and then not pay for any of it. It seems like more about punishment to me. It seems like you're
Mhm.
about control and punishment.
Yeah.
You're not really about the sanctity of human life. You're about like trying to control women because you thought the 1960s and 70s, oh, people got out of control. We got to put a cap on that.
Yeah. There's I can't remember the name of it, but I'm sure folks listening will. It's this long study that's been going on for a long time, but about women who carried a pregnancy instead of having an abortion because they couldn't have an abortion, because they chose not to, etc. And it shows how so many things in their life, their economic status diminished, right? They're just all these things that really can impact um, someone's freedom, truly, through being forced to carry a child. So that's totally to your point about control.
Yeah, this and then the control over saying that, oh, we have like a certain governor in Florida is outlawing trans people. He basically that way he shouldn't exist. He's got ads saying you shouldn't exist, and that's very
Yeah.
dangerous when the
Yeah.
political governor goes and says in ads they believe like a certain people should not exist. I mean that's and then what do you think happens when the police see that? In the the state troopers see that, don't they go and try to further that point of view? And then you have to deal with the consequences of a lot of people getting
Well,
hit with people who believe they should do that to these people.
yeah, so we've seen just this year, there's been a huge rise in hate crimes against LGBTQ plus people. There's been, I mean, it's been in the news a lot of places, bomb threats against different bookstores that have drag
Hmm.
story hour, where someone in drag reads a storybook. And I actually, at one of my book readings, I was presenting at a bookstore that had it's called Indie Reads in Indianapolis, and they had a bomb threat because they had drag story hour, and they had to hire a security guard for my book
Yeah,
talk, which is, in my mind, like, that should be ridiculous. That because I'm there talking about queer people being wrongly convicted, that people are going to be so outraged that they could potentially do harm to me for speaking about that, to the bookstore for putting on the event. But they, hired
well,
a
now you
security
get
guard for
parents
it.
that one parent. Yeah, that's very
So
real.
this is very real.
Yeah,
It's not just hyperbole. It's not just um, speech. It's it has turned into actions, and very violent actions,
yeah,
against LGBTQ people. And I'm sure you know this about the
yeah,
advisory, like the NAACP advisory for Black folks
yeah.
about the dangers of going to Florida. Same thing of there's been advisories about the dangers of queer people going to Florida, like going to an entire state. I mean, 2 years ago, that would have been ludicrous to me, that there's a travel advisory not to go to a state because
What
it could
kind of
be
feels like
dangerous just based on
it
your
feels like the
identity.
'60s, like
But that's where we're at.
if you were in the NAACP and you went down to Mississippi and you were like a white student from a northeastern college, you go down to help with voter registration, you could end up killed. That was and it seems like it's getting back to that where these people say,
Yeah.
yeah, let's bring that Bull Connor stuff back. you know, that's what it feels like to me because, they got people, you got the Moms for Liberty, you got these people who are tied to like, very dangerous groups that are very, like they hit a
Hmm.
point they're like KKK, white supremacist type people, and they get one mom to say let's ban the books about any kind of gay issue.
Yep.
And then you go to the school committee meeting. If you try to say something, they got some people there that might be, in one of these groups, and they physically threaten people. They cause, they threaten people, they attack people, they call people on the phone, they bomb threats on people who happen to speak out and say, why can't you have a book about Rosa Parks? Why can't you have something about the gay liberation
Right.
movement? Oh, you can't have that because that offends one mom. One mom is able to say that offends you, so they take the whole book out. I mean, it's like that to me. How does that make any sense?
Yeah, and it's really sad that it's school libraries and public libraries that are being affected by this. I loved my public library growing up, and to think that I would go to, so I grew up in Fishers, Indiana, where the Fishers Library had to remove many, many books because of series of complaints from a very small group. That I couldn't even read a book where there's a
Yeah.
gay protagonist, like a fiction novel, like Melinda Lau's books. So, like just having a gay character. No, I wouldn't be able to read that.
Well, it's like they're
That's
trying to
really damaging.
erase certain types of history to kind of wash it, and say, there are people who want to get rid of
Yeah.
the Holocaust, they want to get rid of the civil rights movement, any reference to slavery, or if there's a reference to slavery, say we wanted to be slaves. It's like,
Hmm.
really? Okay. Um, it's like they get rid of anything reference to that gay people, trans people, anybody that's not within their mindset and their
Hmm.
books and their spirituality, and it's totally a violation of church and state, you know, to me, and they don't seem to care, and they're getting these politicians that just totally go past it, and then they criminalize liberal behavior. It's like we're getting to the point where you're criminalizing people for walking while black, walking while gay, walking by being a woman. It's like, okay, so then you got to stay in line. You got to walk the line. Like what is that? Like, why do we have to walk the line?
Well, and what does that even mean? I mean, you can't. Like, if you're, visibly different from whatever their norm is, it doesn't matter what your actual behavior is. Um, and so these, queer stereotypes of, queer people being dangerous and deviant and deceptive, like it doesn't matter how much you fall in line. If those stereotypes are there, they're going to keep being
Yeah. Well, they want you to
superimposed
not
on
be.
you,
They
on
want you to
me.
go
Yeah,
back where you didn't come out of the closet. They want you to kind of fake being
yeah,
somebody else. They want you to force
yep,
this behavior underground. That's my opinion. I think they're trying to force people to have an outward face, to
yes,
have a mask that they think is acceptable. And if you try to be like in the 60s and the 70s, it was all about being yourself and being authentic. Even like when black people started having afros, then people were like, oh, you know, hey, baby, you can't be in my company if
yeah,
you have that. Right. And there was a point where it's like, hey, why not? Why can't we want to be what we want to be? Why do we have to perm our hair? Why can't we have an afro? Why can't we be more like that? And it's the same thing I think with gay
mhm,
people saying I can be who I am. I don't have to hide. And now they want you to kind of hide again. They want you to like, oh yeah, don't show that you're an African American. Show that you're something else. That's more, something like Clarence Thomas.
right.
Be more acceptable. Be more acceptable. You got to be more acceptable. But
A lot of it's about shame, like just trying to like use shame, like you should be ashamed, and ultimately trying to get people to, as you're
yeah,
saying, self
yeah,
police, right? Like, oh, let me change my own behavior because I'm ashamed of my
yeah. And I just think
identity.
that this,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
But when
directed.
people won't do
Yeah,
that,
that's
then
what they're
they
trying to
use the
do. They're
criminal
going to
law.
punish you. So like, I think it's
Yeah.
going to get worse before it gets better
Yeah.
because the court system, and what your opinion as a lawyer, like there's a lot of like based on what the last president did, he put a bunch of judges in that have these opinions. And so and then there's
Hmm.
a lot of state legislators that have these opinions. So at the local level, and even at the federal level, there's the people that aren't in your corner. There are people who have been put in because of a political ideology to like not be supporting what we knew to be our rights, and our rights to keep on. This is the Supreme Court that's taken away rights, not reaffirming rights.
Yeah, it absolutely, some of the decisions they've made have been so shocking because, as you said, they have taken away rights from people rather than granting rights. So taking away rights of bodily autonomy. Um, uh, and back to your point about like freedom, I was just talking with a friend who said, you know, by using freedom, we get all these conflicting, who's freedom. But if we think instead about collective liberation, if we think about it in terms of that, then it's not just about, the white mom who doesn't want her kid
Yeah,
knowing that gay people exist, right? It's
that's the
instead
kind of
about collective
confusion they
liberation.
have. It's kind of like an American Taliban that I kind of pointed out that they seem to not understand. It's like you can have a like so if you allow certain people's religious freedom takes away the rights of all these other people. So when does your right of religion that actually starts to take away
Mm-hmm.
your liberty of this other person, and what standing do they have to tell you what to do in bed? What standing do they have to tell you to do anything about you, who you are, your race? You can't
Mm-hmm.
control that. It's like so they're gonna go and start making judgments, and they say, well, I have a right to have this belief, and I'm not going to serve you because you're gay. I'm not going to serve you because it's against my religion. So then you take that as, oh, well, you're not going to serve me. It's like, oh, what, the fire department's not going to put the fire out because they don't like me.
So a lot of these arguments we're hearing now about, religious freedom to be able to discriminate against gay people and queer people, I mean, we need to remember that after the actually before and after the Civil War, a lot of the arguments for slavery um, and for
Yeah,
oppressing Black people were also religious and were based in like religious faith. So, just to your point, like when someone's freedom of religion is actually suppressing the liberation of other people, that's uh, that's not what our Constitution's
because
about. That's
basically
not what
what
our
they put
country is
out
supposed to be
there with
about.
that latest kind of decision about the person that was doing the website for wedding planning, which was kind of fake because it never even a real case. But the thing I worry about that, you think about it, what if
There was
somebody
a
says like black people are the
right.
children of Cain, and I don't want to serve black people because my religion says they're the children of Cain, they're evil, which
Mm-hmm.
was one of the reasons why people could say you could be slaves because we weren't. It's in the
Mm-hmm.
Bible. You can read it that way. So what if there's a
Right.
sect that says in the future, like that's how I believe, so I'm not going to serve black people because they're evil? Based on what they did on that case, it seems like you could do that. That they would say that's okay, based on the way this court is to me. It seems like they're saying that that potentially could be okay.
Yeah. I mean, from the Dobbs decision last summer, where the Supreme Court said, no, you don't have a right to uh, have an abortion, to bodily autonomy. Uh, and frankly, Clarence Thomas laid it out for us, like all of the backsliding of rights, the right to gay marriage, the right to be able to have adult consensual sex with who you wish. And the one thing he didn't include, but which is part of this, is
Yeah,
also
which
like
he said
interracial marriage and discrimination against
he has an
people of
interracial marriage,
color, which he's in. So that whole
he's
backsliding,
exempt.
yeah,
That's the,
yeah, he was like, "Oh, Loving versus Virginia won't be impacted," and it's like, which is the interracial marriage case. Um, yeah, it
but he
will
seems
be.
like
Like
he
it's
would
all
even
part of the
vote for
same
that
logic.
because he's so kind of deluded. He does like a self hater to me, but to me, because of his ideology is like overriding any kind of morality. And so he's got this idea, and he must be see sometimes
Hmm.
with these people, they get these ideas that are beyond any kind of common sense, and they seem to be self-serving certain types of groups. And it's like, okay, there's like, where is any kind of standard procedure? These guys have gone, they said they were going to follow precedent. Then they get in, they don't follow precedent at all.
Right. Right. They don't. They don't. In fact, they're moving as quickly as they can to overturn precedent
Yeah,
and
to
to
go
change the
against
law.
it, which is like, it seems like, okay, do a review, but there's no judicial review at their level because like you told Congress that you believe Roe versus Wade was settled law, and then you just overturned it with some kind of like gerrymandered legal decision. To me, that's how I kind of pointed out. It's like you had to go back to the 1700s to find something. It's the 21st century. You went back that far to find something to make your argument. Really? That's good law.
Yeah. And that was and what he did cite was disingenuous as well. So just like ignoring, actually, because there's scholars of that time period now who are like, that's not actually true either. So even what he was quoting was not accurate and was
He's like,
disingenuous. Um, but I, know some folks who teach constitutional law, and it's like, how do you even teach constitutional law anymore, right? How do you actually teach students that they should respect the Supreme Court decisions and Supreme Court precedent when the Supreme Court isn't
well, yeah,
respecting
it's
them?
making our Supreme Court
It's
like
tough.
a court in like Nicaragua or El Salvador in the '80s, or like in Chile or something. Like you would believe, though. Yeah, okay, those are corrupt
Mm.
court. That's kangaroo court. That it's bad analogy for people. It's kind of, but the fact is, it seems like we're sliding into stuff that we've seen before in other places. And it's like, okay, so how are you supposed to demand respect when you don't deserve respect?
Well, and to your point, we're sliding back into our own history, right? Our own history of criminalizing queer people, our own history of criminalizing Black people and Black behaviors. Like, we're sliding back into our
Which,
own
yeah,
history. And that's what makes it so dangerous about, no, we can't have books that talk about slavery. We can't have books that talk about queer people, uh, because we're
I was reading
repeating
there was a book
history right now.
that's out there. It's kind of like this book like White Lash, and it's actually a book that just came out that says that Barack Obama's election kind of triggered this backlash that kind of forced us back to the 50s or the 1700s. This idea that's like, oh, a black president is like that's a no go. That's like, okay, the 60s and 70s brought us to that, and oh, that's a big alarming thing in American history. So it brought all these kind of like-minded people kind of in this MAGA kind of mindset to say, oh, we got to roll all that back because it's dangerous. And it seems like we're dealing with the consequences of it. We try to take a step forward and it knocked us 20 steps back.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe I remember having conversations with some folks about, well, at least this rips off the band-aid. And yes, we are racist in the United States, and there's no more like, you know, pretending that we're colorblind, which is like, again, not the flex you think it is, but there's not the pretending behind that. But it's just gotten so
Yeah, they're not even scared to do it.
overt
Yeah, it used to be
and
like,
so
I went to school
dangerous.
in, during the Reagan
Right.
time, and people were, the Reaganites. I didn't like them, but because they were saying Nelson Mandela was a terrorist, and it's like I didn't believe that. I was fighting for him, so I was in that time period, and
Uh,
people would go back and they say,
yeah.
"Oh, I wish I could go back to Reagan times." So I'm like, well, that's kind of like the start of it, because I remember as a kid in school, I was fighting against those guys, because I saw what was coming. They were saying government was the problem, that having rules that protected people are the problem. And like Newt Gingrich started coming out. We started to see, even back then, the roots of what we got now. So it's been like an evolution of that mindset. And now we're living with the consequences of if you take that and you take it to its logical conclusion, this is where you go. This is why we're starting to lose all these rights.
Yeah. Um, yeah, and it was all supposed to be for like economic benefit, we're going to get rid of all these, social
It rules.
safety nets,
It rules.
and this will help the common person become wealthier. And like that hasn't happened.
And
It
they still
hasn't
got
happened at
people that
all.
thinking that you could do this kind of, this kind of, I don't know, supply side economics was the big thing. They, and even Bush, he called it voodoo economics, but,
Mm-hmm.
but then he went on board and said it was okay. But, but the idea they like, oh, somehow the robber baron, the oligarch is gonna give you something and you're gonna get something. They never seems to happen. They seem to buy another yacht, buy another company. Doesn't seem to actually help the people. The regular people don't seem to get anything from that, but people still are deluded. Yeah, they're
Move
still
their money
deluded into thinking
offshore.
that you get a lot of people that don't vote their interest. A lot of people that are blue collar and they vote for something that's very
Yeah.
like it's for this oligarch class, and somehow they think they're going to benefit from the things that the oligarchs are setting up for themselves. But there's like no understanding because then they throw them the bait of, oh, we don't like the gay people, we don't like the black people, so you throw them those things and they like it, and then you don't see,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
yeah, then you don't
Mm-hmm.
really see that it's
They're
the
the ones to
oligarch
blame.
that's causing most of your trouble. But he said it was the gay person that caused it. It was the lesbian that caused it. It's the black person that caused it. You didn't see that it's the boss that's actually causing it. It's not the person that.
Yeah, it's all this. Yeah, it's everyone in America can pull themselves up by their bootstraps. If you just work hard enough, you can become a millionaire. You can become a wealthy person. And if you're not, then it's because of, who do you want to blame? It's because of people of color. It's because of gay people. Like that's what's thrown. Exactly what you're saying. But it's all rooted in this. If you just work hard
Yeah, it's
enough,
a
then you'll
Horatio.
be able to be a
Yeah,
millionaire too. And that's just not
not
true.
everybody's gonna be Henry
Sadly.
Ford. Not everybody's
Yep.
gonna be Bill Gates. It's just not gonna happen. So if you want to make sure, like, so you get people who vote against student loan forgiveness because somehow they've been told by a bunch of oligarchs that that's not fair. When they get deals all the time for their company runs out of business, they get $1 million from the federal government. They get hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars of corporate welfare all the time. But somebody can't get something at the other level because they didn't work. Because well, there was Wall Streeters, they lost all your money in 2008, and then they still got to create another company and lose the money again. So, and we bailed them out again. In 2023, we bailed a bunch of people out that had the same kind of problem. Do it again, but you can't give a college kid a break. You can't forgive $20,000. That's a handout,
Right. Somehow
but
that's a handout, a
the
handout to
Wall Street, it's
help
not a
someone with
handout.
student loans. And frankly, just going back to the reproductive rights thing, yeah, yes. And going back to the reproductive rights thing, I mean, teen pregnancy, major problem in poorer areas. I mean, you look at Mississippi that has, I think, the highest rate of teen pregnancy nationally. So if you have teen pregnancy, what are your job prospects? What are your prospects for pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and becoming that millionaire? Well, it's just going to be a lot harder. You're going to be working a ton, but it's um, probably not going to be the type of money coming in that, as you said, people who um, go to some fancy school and then they get in because they're a legacy, and then they graduate and they immediately get on boards and get these huge fancy jobs. It's
Well,
it's
it's
just
trying to
completely set up
understand
differently.
their concept. They're going to force women to have babies, but they're going to probably be very poor level, poor class in the lower classes. So in the modern world, I'm an IT professional. It's highly unlikely that if you force a woman in the poor part of town to have 5 babies, any of those babies are going to become programmers. They're going to become like IT professionals. They're probably going to have a hard time even getting it through the day.
Mm.
So how are they ever going? So you think you're not going to go hire the Indian programmer? Not going to go bring somebody in from Australia? You're not going to bring somebody in from West Germany?
Mm.
You're going to bring somebody in that knows how to do it, and they went to school. They went to a college. Their governments helped them pay to go to college. But this kid may
Right.
have 5 kids. They didn't get to go to school,
Right.
and they don't have good math scores. So where like you think you're going to
No.
force like the immigrants not to come, you're actually going to cause more of them to come. I don't see how you Yeah, I don't see how you're going to
Interesting.
generate the
I
workforce
hadn't
that you
even thought
think
about
because
that.
you're not giving them, you're not thinking it out. You're not giving the schools the tools to teach them. You're not giving them the diet so they can have a good mindset because they're going to be malnutrition means you're not going to have as good an opportunity because you're not going to be healthy. So you look at I was a sociologist. I look at numbers. I look at the process and see what your policies do to the overall macrocosm. That their plan doesn't look like it works to me at all. So I don't know what they think they're doing.
I know. We've talked about like a whole world of major problems
Yeah,
here.
but I think it's like the whole
It's so
wrongful
true.
conviction of queer people is like part of a whole system of inequality that's getting more and more.
Yeah.
That the
Yeah.
difference between like an executive like can be so many times, million like thousands of times like your paycheck. Right? You go to other countries in like in Japan, it wasn't like that.
Yeah.
The CEO wasn't that like 10,000 times the salary of an average person. It wasn't like we're getting the inequality gap is
Mm.
causing these kind of things where people can look at people from different groups and they go, let's play that game. It's like a balance of power game. Let's go and make these boogeymen. Like let's create like the queer people problem. They're the cause. So we don't have to. Nobody looks at what we're
Hmm.
doing,
Yeah.
and it's just like, it's good that you're out there defending people
Yeah.
because people need it.
Sadly, yeah. I mean, again, like better to be rich and guilty than poor and innocent. Just so much of it comes back to that within criminal justice. Um, and I hope for anyone who's been listening, that you'll pick up my book, Manifesting Justice, if you want to know more about queer people being criminalized, wrongful convictions of queer people, but also wrongful convictions of women and their reproductive rights. That's in here too. The bogus, like faulty forensic science, junk science that's used to convict innocent people. Um, and particularly if anyone is picking up the book and interested, would love to have a hear from you, hear what you think about it, and feel free to write on
Yeah, and
Goodreads
I'll
or
put
Amazon
that
what you
link
think
back
about it
up,
too.
and that will be fully clickable. So if to let everybody know when the podcast is published on all the platforms we're on, from iHeartRadio to Amazon to Apple, that link for your book is actually fully clickable and it'll click through. So that right now you can't click on it, but people who go and
Oh,
check
great.
out the podcast, even on Facebook and YouTube immediately after that, that link is clickable on Facebook and YouTube once we're off the air. That link that you have, and I'll send you that to your background. I'm going to create a landing page for your audience where everywhere the podcast can be found, people can just listen or watch on the platform they want, and then they'll be able to kind of look at that and click through and get into it more, get into it deeper. So thank
Well,
you.
thank you for that.
But thank you for being on the.
And if you click on this link, you can get the book from your
Oh,
favorite
cool.
local bookstore or
Oh, so that's a link for
or
anywhere
anywhere.
you can
Yeah.
get the book.
Yeah, yeah. From that link, you can, if you want to do Amazon, you
Well, that's
can,
cool.
but you can also
Yeah, can
do
people
your
like
local
so it's
bookstore.
actually available in print, it's not just online. So that's cool for people who still want the physical copies because like I'm into
Yeah.
that. But thank you again for being on the podcast. Just hold on after we get off because there's a recording process that's going. But yeah, thank you again for being on tonight. I think it's a very informative discussion and getting into an area where we like to have like open discussions, and I hope people enjoyed it. And thank you again for being a guest on the Family Elected Ghost podcast.
Thanks for definitely having me. Really appreciate it.